Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Goldman, Chief Analyst at Analyst Mason. I want to welcome you to this podcast about Mobile World Congress. First thing I want to note is to invite you to our post-event webinar on March 10th, where you'll get a much more extensive view from other analysts as well as myself. And the link to sign up for that podcast is in the show notes for this podcast. So this is a very brief talk about what happened last week at Mobile World Congress. We were back in Barcelona for the first time in 3 years. And it was a great reunion with people that we knew and meeting new people. And I think everybody felt like it went really, really well. The surface level stuff was about future 5G enabled services, IoT enabled industries, virtual reality, the metaverse, gaming, robots. There were a lot of robots and connected vehicles. I really didn't think there were any breakthrough ideas other than the term metaverse. It just didn't seem on the surface like much different than 3 years ago. But I think below the surface, there were actually quite a few differences. One thing is I think the operators were out in force, more so than they traditionally have been. There were a lot of announcements, proactive briefings. The big European operators were there, as they always have been. Also, Rakuten, Dish, AT&T, Korea Telecom, NTT, and others. So I felt like it was a more operator-driven event than I've seen in almost 20 years of attendance. I think that the operators are wanting to assert that they're perhaps more in charge here and less giving things over to the vendors. So one area that was a big deal was private networking. I think especially in contrast to 3 years ago when it really wasn't a topic particularly. So it's gotten a lot of traction recently, maybe getting more attention than it deserves based on how big it really is and so forth. But it certainly got a lot of attention. I think below the surface, the biggest attention was on OpenRAN. Operators are really determined to show that OpenRAN will work. They made a big effort and many announcements about this in presentations. Of course, this OpenRAN issue is mixed in with the whole issue of the story of Cloud RAN, which is a related but bigger issue. We have a very important report coming out very shortly on the whole OpenRAN taxonomy, and you can be looking for that. Now, in addition to the operators, the cloud players were there with a great deal of confidence. I think cloud players of all kinds, of public cloud, the private clouds, hybrid clouds, cloud technology. I think the biggest technology discussion was about how fast does cloud technology take over nearly the whole network. How much of that would actually be in the public cloud? How much of it will be offered as a service? So that was a very big issue. Now, I don't want to neglect radios. There was a lot to say about radio technology, particularly things like massive MIMO, and also issues like low power consumption. But from the days where Mobile World Congress, or when we called it 3GSM, was all about devices and radios, I think that part has really faded to the back of the picture. And if you think about devices, well, you are hard-pressed to find a phone on display. But IoT devices, including robots, yeah, they were there and so forth, but not phones. And that's quite a big change from past decades, let's say. Underlying all this, in my opinion, was a commitment to roll out 5G standalone. It's really the enabler for all these many new services. It demands cloud technology. The commitment on the part of operators and vendors was quite matter of fact. The 5G standards are there and finalized. It's proven. Now we're rolling it out. So this commitment to 5G standalone, I think maybe one of the biggest differences from what we saw 3 years ago to now is the big push, and we're expecting to see it happen very strongly here in 2002 and in the years to come. Now, the vendors were certainly there. I've mentioned all the other players, the traditional vendors there, Ericsson and Nokia in particular, big presence, just not as much in charge of the universe as they once were. There is over the 3-year period of time since the last time we were there in Barcelona, something of a changing of the guard in that regard. So we sent a number of analysts, not as many as we did 3 years ago, but that was about the same as many other participants. They were there, but not as strong a participation as in past years. Overall attendance was somewhere between 25,000 and maybe 40,000. It's a little hard to say. There were some adjacent events going on, but clearly it was a lot easier to engage and move around and participate than it had been in past years. So it was very significant attendance, but much less so than we were used to 3 years ago and 4 years ago. So that concludes my brief update for you on Mobile World Congress. And a reminder about our webinar, as I said, on March 10th. And I encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and register for that webinar later this week. And that concludes this brief podcast on the events of Mobile World Congress last week.